Hey y'all, howdy. Welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell, aspiring author and reader of books. And today I want to talk to you guys about an article that went viral at the end of April and how it made me feel. And then an article that came out in rebuttal to that article. And it's kind of the conversation that this created for me. And so I'd just like to discuss it with you guys. The article, which you all may have seen, is called "No One Buys Books." It was published on Substack by a woman named Elle Griffin. The article itself was pulling facts and figures from the transcripts of the trial that took place in 2022 of Penguin Random House versus the Department of Justice. And basically, Penguin Random House was trying to buy Simon & Schuster. These are two of the big five publishing houses, and the Department of Justice eventually decided this would be a monopoly and didn't allow the acquisition to take place. During the trial, the heads of all of the major publishing houses came and testified on the witness stand, and so she was quoting and bringing facts to light that were specifically talked about by these executives within the trial itself. And her take on the facts and figures that were revealed during this kind of shed an interesting light on the publishing industry, which is known to be pretty secretive about what happens behind closed doors. And it was really, really disheartening. Her article was very doom and gloom, especially for someone like me who loves books, who wants authors to be able to make a good living writing books and wants to support artists who make art. And also, just like as a reader, I want that to be true. And as a writer, of course, as an aspiring author, I want that to be even more true. So yeah, I just felt really, really disheartened after reading this article. I don't want to fault the author of this article that went viral, the No One Buys Books article. She used a clickbait title, which I of course adopted for my own video to get you guys to click on this and have this conversation with me. I think she was doing the same thing that I was doing, where she was taking the facts that were presented to her and just expressing how it made her feel and the extrapolations that she made from that about the future of the publishing industry. So let's dive into what her article said. I'm going to be pulling a lot of quotes from her article and also just kind of summarizing some of it. I will link her article and the other one that I'm going to mention in this video in the description down below so you can read it for yourself. I'm also going to be looking down because I have all of these things written up in a document on my computer right in front of me. So her summary right at the start of the article was basically that the big five spend all of their money on book advances for big celebrities like Britney Spears and franchise authors like James Patterson. Besides celebrity books, the majority of publishing houses' money comes from perennial bestsellers like the Bible, Lord of the Rings, and The Very Hungry Caterpillar. These two market categories, celebrity books and repeat bestsellers from the backlist, make up the entirety of the publishing industry and even fund their vanity project. The quote marks are mine, but she called this a vanity project in the article. Publishing all the rest of the books we think about when we think about book publishing, which make no money at all and typically sell less than 1,000 copies. So that's a pretty interesting look at the industry, and definitely for someone new to the idea of like publishing and big houses, the big publishing houses and stuff, I think is pretty eye-opening. She goes on to say they invest small sums in a lot of books in hopes that one of them breaks out and becomes a unicorn, making enough money to fund all the rest. These unicorns that sell millions and millions of copies, again, I'm just summarizing, I'm not directly quoting at this point. These unicorns that sell millions and millions of copies happen every 5 to 10 years or so, and then she specifically mentions like Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I would also add probably Fourth Wing would sit in that category now. And so basically these like unicorn books fund the publishing of all the other books for years and years to come. That like this is the whole model that the publishing industry works off of. So for those of you unfamiliar with how publishing works, what an author is paid before the book is published is called an advance. If the book never earns out, then the advance is all the money that the author ever makes. And earning out means that the book not only paid back what the author made, but went well beyond that. And paid off like everything that the publisher spent on it. And so once the book has earned out, then the author earns royalties for every book sold past that point. So then this quote says, 2% of titles earn an advance of more than $250,000, which are anticipated bestsellers. And that 2% makes up 70% or more of the total advance spendings at the big 5 publishing houses. So that's pretty wild. And the majority of that 2% of titles go to deals worth more than $1 million. So basically, like, there's a very small number of books that get this amount worth of all of the money that the publishing house is going to spend for the year. But of course, they pay these advances before they actually know how well the book is going to do. It's all a guessing game. It says, publishing houses spend a lot of time trying to get celebrities to write books because they can be so lucrative. Often they spend so much on celebrities because they have a built-in audience, and the assumption is that the marketing for those books will take care of itself. Publishers are willing to pay more to authors with a large number of followers, and that way they have to pay less to market those books. But a lot of celebrity books flop anyway. 85% of books with advances of $250,000 and up never earn out their advance. That's wild. And then it says, this is a direct quote from the CEO of Random House, which was mentioned in Elle's article. If I look at the top 10% of books, that 10% level gets you about 300,000 copies sold in that year. And if you told me I'm definitely going to sell 300,000 copies in a year, I would spend many millions of dollars to get that book. And then the author of the article, after saying that quote directly, is like, that's, obviously insane to spend millions of dollars on a book that's only going to sell 300,000 copies. So we'll talk about that more when we get to the rebuttal article. Further in the article, she says that 96% of books sell less than 1,000 copies, and 50% of books sell less than a dozen copies. Now, this less than a dozen copies thing, it has been disproven. I can link to some other articles that talked about that specifically, but the author of the rebuttal article published an article years ago where she talked about like why this figure was floating around, and there was no justification for it. It like came from a random tweet or something. It was apparently brought up in the trial because a lawyer asked a question about it, but there is no basis for that actual number. It also says only about half of the books published make a profit, and only 50 authors in the entire publishing industry sold more than 500,000 books during a 4-year period. And that came also directly from the CEO of Penguin Random House. Then it goes on to talk about the impact of Amazon on publishing, and specifically the big 5 publishing houses. Publishers pay a lot of money to Amazon to make sure their books show up in ads and in searches. Amazon is a huge threat to their way of business because it has so much data on what readers buy and what readers read. And that is regardless of publishing house, right? So they just have access to everyone's data. And then it says Kindle Unlimited, Audible, and now including Spotify are trying to become like the Netflix of books, where you pay a monthly subscription fee and can read an unlimited number of books. And for that reason, no big 5 publishing houses allow their books to be published on Kindle Unlimited because they said that it would be the complete death of their industry. So that's the basis of everything that was covered in the No One Buys Books article. I will read a direct quote in her conclusion, which was like one of the last paragraphs of the article, where she says, quote, "The publishing houses may live to see another day, but I don't think their model is long for this world. Unless you are a celebrity or franchise author, the publishing model won't provide a whole lot more than a tiny advance and a dozen readers. If you are a celebrity, you'll still have a much bigger reach on Instagram than you will with your book." Obviously a really depressing note to end on, especially, like I said, for someone like myself who hopes to publish a book someday. And I'm still on the fence about whether I want to attempt to publish my book traditionally, which means like through the ways that you would imagine a book is published, using, a big 5 publishing house or even a smaller publishing house, or whether I would like to independently publish or self-publish my books. And I think there's a lot of arguments for both, but this article definitely made me feel like, oh my gosh, like, I guess I'm gonna have to self-publish because like publishing is dying. And there's author tubers that I follow on YouTube, both self-published and traditionally published authors. And, both of them I think have good things to say about their chosen method. And I think self-publishing also is becoming less and less stigmatized, and also the resources available to authors are becoming a lot better, and there are a ton of benefits to that. And so this article was definitely like making me think like maybe I should even stop thinking about traditionally publishing, because self-publishing might be the only way to go in the future. Or I was feeling the doom and gloom of the article. I even like posted this. I just like accepted everything that was in the article, because again, she was pulling directly from the transcripts of the trial. And obviously she added her own thoughts to it, but it just really hit me hard. So now let's talk about the rebuttal article. This was published on April 30th, so I think like a week after the original article. The author of this rebuttal article, his name is Michel or Michael, I'm not actually sure how you say his name, but the title of the article is "Yes, People Still Buy Books." And I will just go ahead and read a quote right at the beginning of the article that is talking about Elle's article, where it says, Elle's article paints a nearly apocalyptic portrait of traditional publishing in which nothing works, few make money, nobody reads, and the whole industry might go poof at any moment. And of course, yes, that is the picture that it paints. That is the impression that I got from reading it. He goes on to say that the broad strokes of the article are true. Most people don't buy books. Sales for most books are lower than many people think. And big publishing does work on a blockbuster model in which they rely on bestsellers to fund everything else. However, and I'll read this whole paragraph as a quote. It says, many of the statistics here being in that article, are wrong or misleading, in part because they were intended to be. Penguin Random House's legal strategy was to present publishing as an imperiled, dying industry beset on all sides by threats like Amazon, a characterization intended to convince the court that a merger was necessary for publishing's survival. There may be truth to that idea, and I'm not saying the quotes are lies. I'm saying the quotes and statistics are tailored toward a specific narrative in the context of a legal battle. So read them with a $2.2 billion sized grain of salt. So that definitely already like paints a different picture, because I wasn't thinking about it from that lens of like, oh, of course the company arguing to buy another company would like be using the statistics in the best way that they could to paint a picture that makes it okay for them to do what they want to do. Like, yeah, well, like, why didn't I think of that, right? But like, I just, I'm not familiar with this industry and the ins and outs of it. So Lincoln's article goes on to say that by conservative estimates, Americans buy over 1 billion books per year, which sounds like a ton to me, but then, people are like, oh, well, yeah, viral video can get more than 1 billion views or whatever. But he goes on to say that that's more movie tickets than were sold in the US and Canada in 2023, which is a cool thing to think about. But I also think that I personally go to the movie theater a lot less than I ever did before the pandemic. So I don't know if that's true for everyone, and then he also mentions, of course, that like that's just brand new movies released in theaters versus like every book across time, not just brand new books that are for sale. So, but regardless of whether you think 1 billion books in a year is a big number or not, he says it is a fairly stable number. Sales of print books has actually increased in recent years, even accounting for the millions of ebooks and audiobooks sold. And then he has a whole bulleted list of interesting facts that, of course, were not contextualized in the first article. So I'll read some of these just because I think they're interesting. It says many of the quotes from the trial seem to reference calendar year sales, meaning they include books that have been out for only a week or a month instead of a reasonable time frame like 2 years, much less lifetime sales. Overall, book sale stats apply to all books from throughout history that are still in publication. So a bestseller from 1924 or 1824 might only sell 10 copies in a calendar year 2024, but might have reached 1 million in lifetime sales. And again, I think in this part, he's arguing against the like some books only sell like 12 copies or whatever. Like that's just not true. He also says that most book sales are tracked by ISBNs, which is like the barcode number, meaning that one novel actually counts as multiple books, as it will have a different ISBN for every format. Hardcover, paperback, ebook, and audiobook will all be different ISBNs, and so when they're sold, they count as different books, even though you and I would think of them as one book. And then he goes on to explain that average book sales, when they talk about this in the trial and also in the article, includes things like crossword puzzle collections, coloring books, poetry, and academic texts, even though when we talk about book sales, most people are thinking of like a novel. He said it would be as if movie statistics included educational videos, online porn streaming, and TikToks. Which I thought was a great quote. But really his point was that average book sales don't really tell you much about how much the average novel sells from a big 5 publisher. The CEO also talked about how they would spend millions of dollars to get a book that would sell 300,000 copies in a year. And he's talking about how that year it's specifically because it's in a year and not lifetime sales. And so a book that sold only 300,000 copies in a year might sell millions of copies over the next several years and be like a perennial backlist bestseller. So of course they would be willing to spend millions of dollars to get that book. And then there was the quote from Elle's article from the trial that said that 85% of books with advances of $250,000 and up never earn out their advance. In this article, Lincoln says that quote might give the impression that books don't make money when they don't earn out advances, but that's a common misconception. A book can be profitable for a publisher well before the author ever earns out the advance. The author might not be earning royalties, but the publishing house is still making a profit from that book. Specifically, after that part of the article, the author, Lincoln, goes on to break down like a hypothetical book that costs like $20 or $30 and gives like a detailed napkin math example of like why that would be true, and I found that to be really interesting. So again, his article will be linked down below from Slate. He says, you might think that only 50% of books making money for the publisher is a bad thing, but comparable industries operate in this way. In entertainment, a few big winners have always funded the rest, so that's not really surprising. And then he goes on to talk about like how much do we really know, like how much does the average novel sell, like forgetting all the crossword puzzle books and coloring books and like all the stuff we don't really think about when we think about book sales. And basically that it's impossible to know because publishers don't really reveal this information, that it's pretty hard to track. But he goes on to say, however, what I can say is that no book that you're likely to have heard of is selling only 12 copies or anything near that. Most new books in bookstores are selling at a minimum hundreds of copies, and most of the time thousands. The popular ones are going to sell tens of thousands, and breakout hits are selling hundreds of thousands or even millions of books. He also mentions that for the most part in the trial, that when they were talking about book sales, they were specifically talking about print book sales and not ebooks or audiobooks. He wraps up the article by acknowledging that there are lots of issues in the publishing industry that need to be addressed, and that, you know, books definitely don't hold the place in culture that readers wish they did. But then I'll read his summary quote here at the bottom. Still, books endure. Publishing is chugging along, not just in the big 5 publishers, which account for most of these stats, but also in indie and small presses where much of the best writing is published. If you want to keep the books coming, well, keep buying them and or checking them out at your local library. So that's the wrap on that article. I also want to mention that I watched another video about this by Michel Schusterman. She is an author tuber and traditionally published, and she made a video about this article as well and her reaction to it as a traditionally published author and how it made her feel. And I thought that was interesting as well. So I'll just link that in case you want to watch more content about this sort of thing. But yeah, so what is my like summary or conclusion, I guess, to draw from this? I guess one, that I shouldn't just take things at face value, especially on topics that I don't know a lot about. I tend to think that I know a lot about this more so than the average person because I do watch so many author tubers and booktubers, and I try to follow publishing industry news, but that it's so easy to mislead with statistics, and I should remember that from my college statistics course. But yeah, it's so easy to fall into like a confirmation bias because we do hear so much about the publishing industry failing and what's the future of reading and kids being less literate after the pandemic. And you know, there's just like all these trickle effects that definitely like lead one to a very like negative thought spiral when it comes to publishing and the future of books and the future of reading and that kind of thing. And because I love reading and books so much, I just don't want that to be true. But I think the doom and gloom mindset is really easy to fall into. So publishing definitely might not be a super healthy industry, but I don't think it is circling the drain as much as the original article made it seem. And so I just wanted to talk about this with you guys because the second article definitely made me feel a lot better and made me realize that I jumped to a lot of conclusions based on the first article that I read. And so I hope if you saw that but didn't see the second one, that this has lightened your overall outlook on it as well. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any more insight or just anything that you thought of while I was talking about this, or if you have other good things to reference related to this sort of thing, I'd love to hear about it. So let me down in the comments below what you think the future of publishing is going to be. I think that'd be fun to speculate on. So anyway, thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me for a little bit today. As always, please be kind, read more books, and hit the subscribe button down below for more bookish content to come. I'll see you next time.